Good morning, Christopher. Thank you
Good.
very much for agreeing to talk to me this morning about your experience of NDAs and racism. And I'd like to begin, if that's okay, like jumping right in. Can you speak a bit about your experience of racism at your university? And could you give us just a couple of examples to help people understand what this has been like?
Absolutely, and I have to say, of course, good morning to you as well. And I've looked at the other videos, and it's really an honor to be asked to contribute to this project. I have to put into context that the university that I was working at is in a small town. It's a small liberal arts university. It's a kind of a small town where everything kind of revolves around that university. And I came from McGill University and from Montreal, where I was predominantly raised. So there was a little bit of a culture shock, I think, that I wasn't completely prepared for in terms of the environment. And I've lived in lots of other environments too. I've lived in Cree territory and different, sub-Saharan African communities. But this was like a little bit more of a culture shock than I think that I was prepared for. So a couple of examples. I think the very first day I was there, I realized, okay, maybe there's a problem. And it was when I was fixing up my office. The thing that a new professor always does, takes your books out, starts putting them on the shelf. And I got called into the administrator just before me, who was called a director at the time. And I got called into her office, and I went in there, like a jolly good fellow, feeling happy. We just sold our house. We bought a house in the eastern townships where we are. Sold our house in Montreal. Feeling like happy, new opportunities, moved my family, all that kind of stuff, and came into her office to a very serious and sour looking face when I came in there, and right away I was read the riot act, and it was shocking, and I was told what my comportment should be like, where I was allowed to be seen, where I was not allowed to be seen. Then it was just this tirade of what literature I was allowed to use, who I had to check with to make sure that my standards were okay. Um, and then it got to just an absolutely humiliating experience on top of what I was already experiencing, where she told me that a faculty member had told her that I was still teaching at McGill University. So she started to say, you can't double dip. We expect you to be here all the time. We're expecting that, you take this tenure track position seriously. And I was really just completely confused. It was so shocking. I didn't know how to respond. And then she made me go to her computer, log on to my McGill account, and show her that I was not scheduled for any teaching in the upcoming semester. So after that experience, I was a little bit baffled. I was a little bit more than baffled. I was shocked. I went to my office. I tried to go about putting my stuff away. Couldn't do it. Shut the door. Went home. Um, I already knew the university I was going to was very white, and I was the only person of color in the department at that time, and I still am the only West Asian racialized Muslim at the university. And I realized, okay, we've made a mistake. We left our entire community, we left our support system, sold our house. My wife gave up her job as a tenured teacher and a part-time lecturer at McGill, brought our family, and I realized it was one of those moments where you're caught, where they sold you something. They've told you you're going to be part of this family, which is really the language they used. And then you get there and you realize, oh, you're not part of the family. You're just a guest, and they're really going to push home. Yeah, they're really going to push home that you're just a guest, and you can be asked to leave at any moment.
Got to the point over the next few years that it got bad enough that you decided you needed to make a complaint?
It didn't stop. It was just this constant onslaught. It came to the point where people would ask me, is it true you're a Mohammedan? And I'd say, Muslims don't use that term. That's like your Christian equivalent. And is this university still fighting the Crusades? Because I haven't heard that term in a long time. I was then asked, and I think this is important to get the context, I was then asked by no less than 3 faculty members, knowing that I was a Muslim, if they could take my 3 children to their Sunday school. And I asked the question, I said, well, I'm a Muslim and my wife is an agnostic. Why would I send my kids to your Sunday school, to your church? And they all said the same thing, so they can learn morals. And I said, what makes you think that I don't have any morals and that I wouldn't be able to pass down any morals? Got progressively worse. The kind of aggression people were allowed to show to me was just starting to become, over the top. And then there was constant, and I've heard this from other people in the series, that you just don't get any opportunities. No matter what your expertise is, no matter how many awards you win, no matter how much recognition you get, you're never going to get an opportunity. But you see a white colleague with no expertise get the opportunity because it's a family. And because it's a family, we're going to give people opportunities. But surprisingly, it's always the BIPOC people that don't get any opportunities. It started to affect my family pretty badly. My wife, who was teaching at McGill University, was making this long drive back and forth. The original conversations I had with the administrators was that, they were dying for part-timers because it was such a, remote location. So they were dying for part-timers. And then it became a shut door. It got so bad that when it really started impacting the family, I went to the union and I said, there is nothing in place dealing with systemic racism. And yet the university claims that they recognize systemic racism. So here's everything I've gone through. What am I supposed to do? So that's at the moment in probably 2018 or 2019, where I approached the union and I said, I can't keep on playing nice. They're not responding to nice. They just keep on doubling down on treating me with this great difference.
So Chris, can you tell me about the moment that the university presented you with an NDA, because they were very concerned about keeping everything that you were saying confidential? When was that, and what happened next? What did you do?
Well, the NDA came up with a completely invented procedure, which didn't exist anywhere in the university, was what they called an administrator investigation, which was supposed to go retroactively through accusations that were basically retaliation. And I realized very quickly when they wanted to give me the NDA, reading the NDA, was that it was going to keep my entire experience locked away in this investigation that was completely ad hoc, that didn't exist anywhere. So I started to ask around my senior colleagues at other universities and other institutions, and they all said the same thing. As soon as you sign that NDA, they're just going to lock away your experience. This is an ad hoc process they've invented. The union's not even involved in it. Therefore, they're going to try and find you guilty of something and then forever keep you silent.
End of the investigation, Chris, the university made a decision that you should be terminated and that you were the problem and you were the source of all of this conflict. They turned it completely around from your initial complaints about racism from your colleagues. And obviously this means that you have had a devastating impact on your career.
Honestly, Julie, I think this is something that requires more discussion, because the process in itself guarantees your destruction. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm found innocent. I still will lose my career. It doesn't matter. That's what when we talk about systemic discrimination, that's part of the systemic discrimination.
The situation at your university, which you're describing as systemic racism, was clearly something that they did not want other people knowing about, and hence the NDA and all the efforts of confidentiality. What do you think, Chris, given that there are also many other problems in workplace investigation problems, but what do you think should happen about NDAs in situations like yours?
I was reminded a little while ago that people tend to discredit anecdotal experience, but in the absence of building up anecdotal experience, you can never find enough data to make a conclusion. And that's what they're going for. They just want everyone to be silent. And if you do research on systemic racism in universities, there are very little voices of people saying, this is what happened to me. They're all hidden away in NDAs. And even top public academics, public intellectuals who have lost their jobs, they're still not allowed to talk about what happened to them. So they're in search of other faculty members that they can do research on, but everybody has signed one of these NDAs. Therefore, you're never going to be able to accumulate all this anecdotal evidence to lead towards data. And that is very purposeful. It's very, very purposeful. So the university makes large claims about recognizing systemic racism because the university students want them to do that. But they're never going to recognize it in their own backyard, ever. They won't, because it's too dangerous for them to recognize that.
So you've started with others, Chris, as a result of this experience, the BIPOC Academic Coalition of Canada. Could you say a little bit about what you're hoping your new organization might do to raise awareness of this issue?
I think for both myself and for MA Avalanto, our experiences are just exactly the same. And when we realized our experiences were exactly the same, to the point where we were, when we first met, we were joking with each other that the other person was stealing the other person's story, because it was exactly the same. We realized, wow, this is not some kind of Machiavellian brilliant move that they're doing to get rid of you. No, it's the same process they go through. And so we want to make people aware of that, especially the younger generation. We want to make the younger generation realize that when you are a whistleblower, either about yourself or about somebody else, there are very, very clear steps that they take within an institution that doesn't take a genius to do. They have the power, which is part of the systemic discrimination, to destroy you. And we want more people to be aware of this so that more people will stand up and say, this has happened to me. Until that happens, and until that occurs, until we put ourselves out there and say, this happened to me, this happened to MA, we know it's happened to other people, we need you to stand up and say that it's happening to you, it's just going to continue. It's just going to continue. And that's what we're trying to do with the BIPOC Academic Coalition, is through education and research and advocacy to really bring this forward and help the Canadian public understand that their public institutions are failing them.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for speaking to me today.
Thank you very much for having me.